Hello and welcome to our next video. In this lesson, we're going to start creating the database migrations for our contact web context. So last time, after we checked into source control, we ended up having an error on App Harbor and said error. An error occurred while processing your request. Well, I don't really know what that really means. I could probably dig into logs maybe on App Harbor, and I could have maybe turned on some more verbose error messages here using my web config. But I'm 99.9% sure the reason I'm getting an error when I go to the contacts page is because I don't have a contacts data context, and ultimately it doesn't know where to put the contacts or try to pull from, and so the DB context is erroring out. And so what we're going to do is get that fixed first. So we need to turn on migrations now in order for our contact web to work. Now note we have the contact web context here, and this is called contact web context, and it is in place, and it tells us we need to turn on migrations if we want to do that. But here's the interesting thing. We already have migrations on. We turned them on when we set this up for our application DB context a few lessons ago. And what that did was allowed us to have our identity for the user accounts and that part of the database and have that all turned on. Now, if you were only using one context, this wouldn't be a problem, but because I separated the context into an identity context so I could have my login information all stored in one database and my contact specific information stored in another, now I need to have multiple DB contexts, and I'll have a problem when I try to run migrations. So I'm going to show you that. I'm going to go enable migrations, and I'm going to say context type name. So this is, now that I have multiple contexts that I want to work with, I need to specify which one I'm going to work with. So I'm going to say contact web context, which is just the name of this contact web context again. So if you're unsure what yours was called, just look for your model that's a context and figure out exactly what to type here. Now, we can run the verbose, I believe, if we want. I'm not going to. Let's just run it, and we'll just let it sit here for a second as this runs, and we should see an error that migrations are already turned on. So what we see is that they are, and it says if we want to do this for sure, use the -force parameter. Now that's all good. I mean, we could use -force if we want to, but I want to just caution you. Whenever you're given the option to use -force, use it sparingly and only when you know exactly what you're going to do. Ultimately, in this case, if we use -force, we would overwrite and get rid of our configuration that is allowing us to do the identity for the application DB context. So what I want to do is I'm going to rename this configuration file. Ultimately, I can only have one file called configuration, and that's why I'm getting this error. So I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to name it to application DB configuration so that it matches exactly what context it's for, and it's that configuration. So I'm going to hit enter, and this will ask me if I want to rename. I'm going to say yes. And now my application DB configuration is there, and it's the same one we had. It's just not called configuration anymore. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the up arrow, and I'm going to run enable migrations on that contact web context again. And this time it should work because there's no longer a configuration.cs file, and that's fine. And it should also create an initial migration path for setting up the database when I do this. So there we see a new configuration file, and it won't let me click while it's still building. And there we see our initial creates. So my configuration changed, so I'm going to say yes to all. I was being a little antsy there, sorry. So we did, everything was correct. Code first migrations enabled for Project Contact Web. Well, they already were, but it's actually now allowing us to do both of these. So configuration right now is pointed to contact web context. So you could rename this to contact web configuration if you wanted to. I'm going to leave it because I'm not going to do any more, and I'm just going to leave it at the basic level here. And it's pointing to what it needs to. So I'm going to go ahead and save that file just to make sure everything's good. And that's really all I need to do in order to set up and get my initial migrations ready to go. Let's look at what it did here. It created an initial create method, and let's actually just maximize this so we can see it a little easier. It has an up method and a down method, which means, of course, if we're going to run it to push to a database, it will run the up. If we're going to roll it back, it would run the down. So it's going to create a table or drop a table, which makes sense. And that's that contacts table on the context it's running against, which is the contact web context, whatever database we point that to in the connection strings. And of course, the table is created, has ID, user ID, first name, last name, email. You can see that this just mirrors exactly what our contact model is. The one thing to note here is because we used a lot of strings, a lot of these can be null. So right now you can't have a null birthday and you can't have a null user ID or ID. And those are good. We don't want those to be null. And a null birthday maybe would have been okay, but let's not. Let's just leave it so you automatically have to put at least some date in there that makes sense. Or something, anyway, that translates to a date time. And so we have that, but that allows us to put first name and last name and email and all that to null. So if you wanted to be more specific, you could probably, say I don't want first name and last name and city and state to be null, since that was what they were asking for on the application. But I'm going to leave it like this. For the point of our course, we're just going to go ahead and roll with this, and we're not going to go into too much specifics, but just be aware of that. If you're building a real world course, you probably want to be a little more strict on what you'll allow to go into your database or what you won't. But that would be up to you. But that ultimately wraps up our look at the creation of our database migrations for the contact web context. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.